Dear President Niinistö, Federal President, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests. On behalf of the Körber Foundation, I would like to welcome you most warmly to this event to mark the 60th anniversary of the Bergedorf Round Table and the 10th anniversary of the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum. An event that we had planned as a celebratory event. Anniversaries should be celebrated as they fall, as we say in Germany, but it's difficult in these times. That's why I'm particularly pleased and grateful that we're able to hold this event here despite the difficult conditions. You don't have to be a doomsayer to paint the picture of the world in gloomy colors 60 years after the founding of the Bergedorf Round Table. The COVID virus still has a firm grip on us and is deepening the rifts on a global level, but also within our societies. I fear that we're going to see more in the next few weeks. Millions of people are threatened with the loss of their livelihoods in the face of the climate crisis. On the eastern border of the European Union, refugees are being abused for the cynical power calculations of a ruthless dictator. Around the world, autocracies are on the rise and putting pressure on the model of liberal democracy. Civil society players who campaign for human and civil rights are increasingly becoming the target of intimidation and repression. Russia's oldest non-governmental organization, Memorial, with which the Körber Foundation has been working for many years within the history projects, threatened with dissolution. We're witnessing the emergence of a new bipolar competition of the systems between Beijing and Washington, vying for political, economic, and technological supremacy. And Europe? Europe is still struggling with its much-vaunted Weltpolitikfähigkeit, the ability to help shape world politics. But this is indispensable if the old continent is not to become collateral damage in the new rivalry between the great powers. Is this what a world coming apart at the seams looks like? It is easy to lose heart, and the belief that the motto of our founder, Kurt Körber, talk with each other, not about each other, can still make a difference today. What is the point of a dialogue that transcends political, ideological, and religious boundaries if the clashes of interest between the West and the great autocracies of the East continue to intensify, when images of the enemy are cultivated and what divides is emphasized rather than what unites, when red lines are crossed and brinkmanship and hybrid warfare become the means of choice? President Niinistö has an answer to this that is as simple as it's convincing. I would like to quote, "We need the most intensive dialogue with those with whom we have the least agreement." That, ladies and gentlemen, is precisely the spirit that was embraced by the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, the CSCE for short, and was codified in the 1975 Helsinki Final Act. I would like to see this very same spirit of Helsinki wafting through plenary halls and palaces and conference rooms more often in today's world situation. When Kurt Körber founded the Bergedorf Round Table in 1961, the world situation was no less threatening than it is today. The construction of the Berlin Wall literally cemented the division of Germany and Europe. With a failed invasion of the Bay of Pigs, the world was heading for a dramatic escalation between East and West. It was at this time, at the height of the Cold War, that Kurt Körber decided to rely on the power of dialogue with the Bergedorf Round Table. A visionary, some said, a naive do-gooder, others said. What is the point of unofficial talks in a small circle, in camera, and without a final communique, so without tangible results, speaking without results? In retrospect, Kurt Körber's steadfastness and his staying power proved to be spot on. For the initially extremely delicate threads of dialogue that Körber established between the Soviet Union and the West made a long-term contribution to the policy of détente, and thus paved the way for overcoming the division of Europe. It was precisely the informal atmosphere, the small group of participants, and the openness to results that proved to be the key to people listening to each other in the first place and getting into conversation with one another. And so, since 1961, many have made use of the protected space of the Bergedorf Round Table. Presidents, chancellors, prime ministers, ministers and their advisors, but also many who only moved up to such leadership positions years later. So despite differences and conflicts, to keep up the dialogue with one another and better understanding the motives and interests of the other side, that is what the Bergedorf Round Table has been about for 6 decades. As you, Mr. Federal President, once put it, and I quote, "Comprehensive is not understanding and certainly not agreement." In times of the world coming apart, I believe we need more dialogue, not less. But this dialogue is, to use Max Weber's phrase, as a strong, slow drilling of hard boards. It requires perseverance, frustration tolerance, and strategic patience, and, to use Max Weber's words once again, passion and a sense of proportion at the same time. We won't have any quick mends here. Now, 1961 is not 2021, and the framework conditions for talks with countries like Russia and China have changed fundamentally. Compared to the years of the Cold War, the degree of economic interdependence and thus mutual dependence is many times greater today. This makes it all the more true that the costs of not talking to each other but about each other are generally higher than the risks of dialogue. But dialogue must not become an end in itself, and certainly not a staging exercise from which those involved draw political capital. So what are the ingredients for an effective dialogue? First of all, we need to acknowledge the strategic realities, see the world as it is and not as we would like it to be. This includes recognizing that China and Russia, for all their hopes of transformative power of economic interdependence, have not moved closer to the West. Quite the opposite. And so we would be well advised not to overload the dialogue with unrealistic expectations. If a reconciliation of interests in clearly defined policy areas can be achieved, enabling political decision makers to make more informed decisions, much has already been gained. And what about the much vaunted trust factor? As in any area of interpersonal interaction, trust is a very precious commodity in international politics. Genuine trust takes time. And how, if not through patient dialogue, through personal talks, can trust be built? Ladies and gentlemen, Richard von Weizsäcker, who chaired the Bergedorf Round Table for nearly 20 years, once described the Round Table as a training camp for those willing to cross the boundaries of their own disciplines, respective parties and interests, to learn in a confrontation with the diversity of experiences and perspectives of others. Even in today's world, this kind of intellectual training is indispensable. So let us continue to talk to each other, not about each other, and let us stay on the path of dialogue, even if it crosses inhospitable terrain. What exactly this path of dialogue might look like is something we would like to reflect on together with you today. I'm extremely pleased that you, Mr. Federal President, will share your thoughts on this with us immediately afterwards. It's a particular pleasure to have you, President Niinistö, with us today. You will then present your perspective on the future of international dialogue and a possible revival of the Spirit of Helsinki. In the spirit of Körber's talking to each other, not about each other, we're very grateful that you, President Niinistö, are available for a brief discussion on the stage, which will be conducted by my colleague Nora, Müller, head of our International Policy Division. Ladies and gentlemen, as it's customary at Körber, we will of course include your questions. For those of you who are following our event via the live stream, please post your questions under the Twitter hashtag that we will give you later on. Thank you very much for your attention. I would now like to invite you, Mr. Federal President, to take the stage. Dear President Niinistö, dear Sauli, dear Dr. Paulsen, Your Excellencies, MPs, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you, first of all, for the opportunity to speak here today on the birthday. Congratulations, and this despite the pandemic caution, I can be here personally and physically. So the topic of international dialogue, despite all the technical progress, is something that can hardly happen without the encounter of people. It can actually not work without the encounter of people. So with all those concerned with foreign policy and the state of the world, it is easy to explain convincingly why we need to address the risks and challenges of our time, and we need more dialogue and more international cooperation to do so. But it's also not much harder for us to diagnose that the reality is different. International cooperation, or global governance, as it likes to be called, does not yet succeed all that often. In any case, it fails to keep pace with the objective need for more joint action. In other words, the global governance gap is growing and has been for some time. If I may be a little more fundamental, so while we are more globally connected today than ever before as individuals, but also as states, and Germany as a country in the middle of Europe in a special way, and at the same time we observe a fragmentation not only of our societies, but also of what should actually be an international community. Whether it is the fight against the pandemic, worldwide fair access to vaccines and medicines against COVID-19, whether it is the fight against man-made climate change, the next milestones of which have just been agreed in Glasgow, successful collective action must not only overcome national egotisms, it must also balance real differences in interests, and it must deal with power rivalries that stand in the way of good, objective solutions. We have been observing for years that these power rivalries are on the rise again. We're witnessing the emergence of a new geopolitical confrontation and a competition increasingly understood as a conflict of systems. Some see this to be the harbingers of a new Cold War. I think, by the way, this is a misleading analogy. Misleading because it neglects the close and the most intimate interdependence that characterize our global economy today across all systemic boundaries. And above all, and I think that is the most decisive point, it suggests that there's a kind of comparability that does not adequately take into account what is actually new about our situation, the tremendous change brought about by the digital revolution and the development of new technologies. So, how do we deal with it? Henry Kissinger asked during our conversation in New York on Friday, so how do we deal with that when new weapon systems are smarter than the people who use them? It is these new means of confrontation for which there are no contractual restrictions, no reliable agreements and arrangements that give me great concern when I think about the future of peace and security. This is also true for our own continent, Europe. Cyber attacks that can hardly be attributed, or only with a great delay, hacker attacks that increasingly blur the borderline to armed conflict, the foreseeable use of artificial intelligence and more systems of a civilian and military nature, for all of which we will have to strive for a minimum of mutual understanding and opposed restraint. We have to do this if we want to maintain peace. At the same time, however, and I observe this with no less concern, our capacity for dialogue, understood as a serious effort to reach an understanding and conversation with other actors or nations, despite conflicting interests, our capacity for dialogue is not increasing. On the contrary, time and patience, two of the most important conditions for successful dialogue, have become scarce commodities in our age. An age which expects quick results, always demands the greatest possible transparency, and keeps an eye on fluctuating public opinion. But just as we cannot resign ourselves to the fragmentation of our own societies, but rather must always strive for cohesion and cooperation time and again, so too we must always strive for bridges and dialogue at an international level. Dialogue enables the change of perspective, understanding and avoiding the unwanted escalation, and in the best case, it enables trust. Dialogue is not a technical exercise. It requires seriousness on all sides, and the willingness not to make your own position absolute. We find this difficult in the face of many conflicts and wars, in the face of human rights violations and repression. Mr. Paulsen, the threatened closure of a respected but highly meritorious organizations such as Memorial through open criminalization of its valuable reconciliation work and research leaves us stunned. It cannot be left without sharp criticism. I therefore also hear the contradiction. So when we demand dialogue, and I read it more or less every day, sentences like, dialogue is reward for blatant misconduct, or dialogue means caving in to violent actors, to an opponent who does not play by the rules, to the point of more general sentences, dialogue is naive. I do not share this view. The serious discussion, even about profound conflicts of interest, is too often conducted by the media today with megaphones and an eye primarily on their own audience. And secondly, dialogue is also needed in order to make actual red lines clear, and thus to make it credible in all seriousness. Yeah, we're living in a time of great hardening of positions, but at the same time we're living more and more visibly in a world in which no single actor, no single paradigm can dominate the complexity of our world. In this world, dialogue is, of course, no guarantee of consent, neither for consensus, nor for stability, nor for peace. But it is the necessary condition for them. That is why I feel connected to the basic idea of the Bergedorf Round Table, which I would like to congratulate them on their anniversary, just like the Körber Foundation. As you said, Mr. Paulsen, talking to each other is better than talking about each other. That is what 60 years of Bergedorf Round Table teaches us, with so many participants and so many necessary and important initiatives that have been triggered. So that's why I support with great conviction the initiative launched by my friend and Finnish counterpart, President Niinistö, said under the banner of reviving the Helsinki spirit. It's true. We have been closer to the goal of a peaceful Europe before than we are today. But that moment was not the moment of the signing of the Helsinki Final Act almost 50 years ago, that Helsinki would prove to be a milestone, the beginning of a process that would end with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, a more peaceful and ultimately a reunited Europe. We know because now we're 5 decades wiser. Unfortunately, we also know that this state of affairs, which was achieved with much effort, as it was with happiness, has no guarantee of eternity. Reviving the spirit of Helsinki for the challenges of our time, for the de-escalation of violent conflicts, as well as for the mastering of global tasks through collective action, is a task that is demanding as it is necessary for every responsible foreign policy. I would like to see, dear Sauli, that Finland and Germany would work together as closely as possible in the coming years. Thank you very much.
President Steinmeier, dear Frank-Walter, Dr. Paulsen, ladies and gentlemen, I want to begin by congratulating the Körber Foundation for the 60th anniversary of the Bergedorf Round Table format. President Steinmeier already mentioned your slogan of talking to each other, not about one another. I too find it very impressive. That principle has stood the test of time. In fact, genuine international dialogue has become even more valuable in this day and age. At the risk of sounding melodramatic, our common future is at stake. We are faced with an increasing amount of truly common challenges, wicked problems that not even the strongest ones of us can solve alone. Safeguarding peace and security, ensuring the sustainability and welfare of our planet, these are, in my view, our most urgent human responsibilities. We can only shoulder these responsibilities by working together. The demand for common solutions is on the rise, and yet, at the same time, we have severe problems on the supply side. Our ability to carry our responsibility for future generations is seriously hampered by the growing tensions in the world. Let me be clear, I do not expect these tensions to disappear anytime soon. On the contrary, dividing lines between great powers may well only become stronger in the coming months and years. That will have its unfortunate impacts also on us. It will require firmness and resilience from all of us. But if we want to prevent these disagreements from spiraling over the control, there's no alternative to dialogue. At the end of the day, we can't have sustainable security without at least a certain degree of trust. And trust is extremely difficult to build if we do not talk to each other. Discussions among the like-minded are not enough. Dialogue is particularly important with those with whom we agree the least. Ladies and gentlemen, the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe and its summit in Helsinki in 1975 was one of the turning points in the history of the Cold War and détente. But its significance is not only historical. I believe there are three separate legacies from that same source, the original CSCE, that can help us safeguard peace and security in the future, in Europe, in other regions, and globally. I call these legacies the letter, the model, and the spirit of Helsinki. My main focus is on the spirit, but let me say a few words about the two others too. First, the letter. With that I mean the text of Helsinki Final Act, with its 10 principles guiding relations between states. That document continues to be the only available foundation for cooperative security in Europe, for a European security order. To name a few examples of those 10 commitments: refraining from the threat or use of force, inviolability of frontiers, territorial integrity of states, respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. Although these principles have been preached, they are not broken. We must be unwavering in defending them. As the guardian of the letter of Helsinki, the OSCE is in a difficult but crucially important position. With the 50th anniversary of the Final Act approaching 2025, we must use that moment for more than just remembering the past. We need to take responsibility for the future of our continent. Finland stands ready to do its part. Therefore, at the end of last week, together with Finnish government, we formally decided to put Finland forward as a candidate for OSCE chairmanship in 2025. Second, the model. We in the OSCE area often only see the problems the organization is currently struggling in. But in some other regions, the perspective is different. In their eyes, the achievements and the potential of the model outweigh the challenges. Over the years, there has been a consistent interest on the CSCE model from across the world, from Korean Peninsula to the Gulf area. Could something similar, a structure of different baskets and a set of confidence-building measures, be emulated in a different time and in a different region? I believe it could. If others see the Helsinki model as a conducive to cooperative security and stability in their regions, we must support that. Finland has often facilitated these kinds of discussions. Finnish activities on the front continue mainly behind the scenes in so-called track 2 discussions between experts. And if these conversations are fruitful, at some point they may also rise to a higher political level. Dear friends, as important as the letter is for Europe and as much promise as the model can hold for other regions, it is the spirit of Helsinki that I want to emphasize as a global necessity. The Helsinki spirit is more than documents and agreed principles. The Helsinki spirit is more than institutions and structures. The Helsinki spirit is a mindset, and more than that, it's a working method to overcome divisions and mistrust. It is a willingness to engage in genuine dialogue. even with adversaries and competitors. It is a desire to see common denominators, even in the midst of fierce disagreements. It is a determination to build trust, even when divisions between blocs run deep. If it was possible to generate that kind of a mindset in the middle of coldest Cold War, it can't be impossible today. Right now, we do not need another summit somewhere in the distance. The task is much more urgent. We need to work for the Helsinki spirit right here and now. Because the dangers are also here right now. Peace in Europe is not assured. Finding a solution to our common threats and challenges is not guaranteed. When I look around, I see a world in great peril. Ladies and gentlemen, the Helsinki Spirit approach is not geographically limited. In the past months, I have engaged my colleagues from across the world on this general thinking. From Washington to Beijing, from Moscow to Berlin, I haven't yet heard anyone saying no to the need for more Helsinki spirit in today's world. Quite on the contrary, the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. Those conversations have been a good start. Now is the time to turn a somewhat abstract idea into something more concrete. I believe that one area where there's a particular need for the Helsinki spirit is the intersection of traditional arms control and new technologies. During the Cold War, arms control negotiations served a double purpose. Their direct results, the concrete arms limitations, and the confidence-building measures made the world safer. But arms control had also an indirect effect. The trust created between the negotiators in their special field flowed into the general relationship between the superpowers. It created a virtuous cycle. Now we face a dual challenge. First, precisely those arms control agreements reached during the Cold War are rapidly disappearing. This leads to the old dangers of conventional and nuclear weapons alike re-emerging. But second, while we urgently need to revive the old mechanisms, the rapid technological development is making those mechanisms increasingly irrelevant. With President Steinmeier, we had discussed the importance of trust several times in the past. Earlier today, we had a chance to dive deeper into the potential of the Helsinki spirit in general and to the themes of arms control and new technologies in particular. First between the two of us, then in a broader conversation drawing from insights delivered by a few experts from Finland and Germany. I'm certain that we can work together on these issues in the months ahead. In other partnerships, we are looking at ways to combine the Helsinki Spirit approach with our common agenda process at the United Nations. I had a promising conversation with Secretary General Guterres at the UN General Assembly in New York in September, and our teams have continued developing the cooperation since. Also there, the focus is on peace and security, arms control and emerging technologies, conflict prevention and building trust. As the UN plans to develop a new agenda for peace, I sincerely believe that we can use the Helsinki spirit to reduce strategic risks on the global level. I still go back to arms control. The arms control field is now much more complex than it was in 1970s. New technologies, from artificial intelligence to drones, are changing the picture completely. Their proliferation is far more difficult to control, their use far more difficult to reliably trace. With a growing number of actors and a far less predictable landscape, building trust becomes even more difficult. Yet, build it we must. Ladies and gentlemen, there are many tensions that draw deep lines between nations and peoples. Despite them, we have our common human responsibilities, safeguarding peace and security, ensuring the sustainability and welfare on our planet. Are we willing to accept this responsibility? Thank you.
Mr. President, could I ask you to stay on stage with us? Thank you very, very much.
About to succeed to escape you.
No, nobody escapes me, not to worry. Mr. President, thank you very much for making time to ask some easy questions as we decided earlier on. And thank you also for sharing your thoughts on the Helsinki spirit. And in fact, I wanted us to start by thinking a little bit about how we can implement the spirit of Helsinki, the legacy of Helsinki, into the day-to-day of international politics. And you know, let's call a spade a spade. We see some very blatant violations of not only the spirit, but also the letter of Helsinki in European security. There's the annexation of Crimea, there's the war in Ukraine, and unfortunately, we've seen more. So people say about you, Mr. President, that you are, and here I'm quoting, a cool-headed realist, not an idealist. So I wonder, how can you still hope to kind of restore that legacy of Helsinki when the language that reality speaks is so very different?
Actually, what you said is full proof that we need something else. What is taking place in Europe, what is taking place worldwide, is not the way forward. When you asked what kind of concrete policy Helsinki spirit includes, we have to keep in mind that the mindset is very important. Whatever you do, the mindset is very important. If we can have the leaders of the world, superpowers, having the same mindset that, well, now we are on the razor's edge. We have to do something. We have to try, at least in minimum level, to trust each other so that we can go forward, not being all the time afraid of each other. You referred to what has happened in Europe after the Helsinki Final Act. Like I said, it has been breached, but it's not broken. The 10 principles are still there.
They're not there, but they're not being followed.
Yes, they are not. It's been breached. But what we should now, first of all, our first task is to prevent any further breachments of the principles of Helsinki Act. well, there might be a danger. And that demands that there is a dialogue, a mindset to have dialogues between adversaries. Many have asked me, how can you believe in such a process, that the mindset would be found? Let's go back. This is not history. Helsinki spirit is not history. It's for the future. But nevertheless, let's try to go to the heads of those who, heads of states in 75. Why did they, at the end, agree at least of something? I'm maybe a bit cynical, but I would say that they were so afraid of each other. There was an aim to have a balance of horror. And if we look today, we heard President Steinmeier talking about new armaments, artificial intelligence, drones, robots, whatever. We are, in a way, in a more difficult position than during the 70s, when they were afraid of nuclear power and nuclear missiles. Because nuclear missiles, you always, if you put the button, you knew that the other one is going to press the button too. But these new elements, they are very difficult to trace. So you have to have certain amount of trust.
Trust is the key word here, Mr. President. My next question is about sort of the balance between dialogue and deterrence. I wanted to ask you, how much deterrence do you actually need, do we actually need to kind of balance the dialogue with so-called challenging actors? And here I'm talking about Russia, I'm talking about China also to some extent. And while I give you some time to think about that question, I want to say to all our viewers online who follow us via our live stream that you may post questions on Twitter at the hashtag Körber-versary, not anniversary, but Körber-versary. Now back to you, Mr. President. Dialogue and deterrence, what's the right balance here?
Well, if we believe in dialogue, we have to believe also that it leads to something. And if it leads to trust and agreements, I surely prefer always dialogue. And even dialogue, if the alternative is not to speak, it's worse. It's worse than a dialogue which doesn't lead anything. But not to speak is the most dangerous way of in international policies.
Let's maybe talk about some concrete examples when it comes to challenges that we are currently faced with in Europe. And one of the more pertinent issues, I guess, is the rather unusual military build-up that we've seen on the part of Russian forces along the Ukrainian border recently. How concerned should we be about that, you think? I mean, Finland has a very long border with Russia. Finland knows a thing or two about this big, important neighbor. Is there a sense that in the Kremlin, some people may be thinking that at this moment the West seems to be weak, and this could be a good moment to kind of finish some unfinished business in Ukraine? Do you share that concern?
Yeah, actually we saw something similar taking place during the springtime. Now we have received a bit different information how much actually military forces are concentrated there, but nevertheless it's very obvious that it's taking place. So we are at least in the same situation when we were last spring. What happened? Well, my reading is that happened so that President Biden and President Putin were discussing by phone, and suddenly after that, Russia announced that it was just an exercise, that they are backing. Does it work this time, or what really happened? We don't know, but this is what we have heard publicly in springtime. What happens now? I had a possibility of discussing with President Putin lately, and I understood that they are preparing a new discussion with President Biden, hopefully quite soon. So surely, if that would be the means to calm down the situation, we should be very happy. But one thing is missing, and that's Europe, which is not involved in discussions dealing with Europe.
And you're not concerned that there may be the imminent danger of another military confrontation on European soil that is impending?
At least at the moment, we are facing very much similar situation than in springtime. Well, we didn't see then a military conflict. And let's hope that we are not seeing it this time, neither.
Absolutely. Mr. President, another arena which is a challenging one is what's going on at the Belarus-Polish border, although it seems that the situation is somewhat easing, but still I think this is another example of hybrid measures that are employed to destabilize Europe. So my question to you would be, what are the lessons that we should draw from this, and how can we become more resilient when it comes to these hybrid acts?
Yes, this is not the first time. This is clearly hybrid, but what we saw in the borderline of Greece earlier on is a bit similar. What we saw in Finland 6 years ago was also a bit similar. But this is clearly a led operation, and that makes a politically led operation by Belarus and President Lukashenko, and it makes it clearly a hybrid act. I have a feeling that, or I doubt that picking up Poland as a target now has also other intentions than just put people through the border. It's creating conflict, and maybe creating conflict inside European Union. That is, that we hear voices already now that Poland is not doing the right thing, and on the other side we hear comments in Europe that yes, Poland is on totally right what they are doing. How we can answer to these kind of activities, and also like it is very much possible that we see in the future large-scale immigrations. So it's very necessary that European Union has clear ruling, and hopefully European Union takes whole responsibility of all the borderlines, European Union borders, and then create a process where we can rapidly react and also give very fast answers to those who are coming to Europe. Yes or no, whether the status of refugee are fulfilled or not.
So that this wouldn't
I think this is a European issue.
So your plea is not to take in those people who are sort of at the border, at the Polish border, but rather to kind of improve the process to deal with those coming to Europe.
Well, we are now on the situation where already in Greece and now in Poland, that surely we have to ask ourselves that when we, in speeches, very easily take up the agreements, the international human rights agreements, can we accept a behavior by ourselves which is different? And this is quite a dilemma for Europe, and raises surely questions whether at least partly we should create new models, because the situation now is totally different than when the international agreements were originally agreed. Vienna Agreement more than 70 years ago, or approximately 70 years ago. These circumstances are totally different, but surely we need clear rules.
That is certainly the case. What I wanted to do now, Mr. President, is to take us to a bit of a different arena, namely to another quite challenging actor in terms of from a perspective of the European Union, and that is China. If we talk about a changing global order, then China is very much the elephant, or maybe the dragon in the room. We have done a poll at the Körber-Stiftung for our recent edition of the Berlin Pulse, a publication that we do every year. And according to that poll, 55% of Germans actually believe that China's influence on the global stage is negative. This is a rather new development, because in previous years, Germans tended to be rather indifferent about China's global role. Now, we see this very critical stance. We also see that your country, Finland, is kind of quite good at managing this tightrope walk between having, I think it's even called a special relationship with Beijing on the one hand, and on the other hand, aligning closely with other Western nations when it comes to China policy. So that's on that background, I wanted to ask you, Mr. President, how does Finland manage this kind of tightrope walk? And will there be a point when Helsinki will have to decide whether it's going to be China or whether it's going to be the US?
Actually, Helsinki has decided times ago, and we have followed EU opinions and EU statements. I think that EU has, at least so far, had a role of its own in relation to China, and I think that we should have that in future too. Surely we have transatlantic very good relations with USA, but that doesn't mean that we have always to be exactly of the same opinion. And I think that European Union finds a way of positioning itself in an independent position, surely keeping our values in mind all the time.
And you don't think that there will be a point when you know, Europe will have to make a decision?
Choose your side. Do you mean that? No. If you're strong, nobody tells you to choose your side, because you can be on your own side. And that is what European Union has to be capable to do.
Which is, of course, at this point in time, rather wishful thinking than reality, right?
No, it's not wishful. So far, I think European Union has succeeded in it.
Well, maybe this is a good point, Mr. President, to bring in a question from one of our viewers. It's a question from Mabel Liu Miao. Mabel is the co-founder and Secretary General of the Center for China and Globalization in Beijing. And she asks, what role does the EU play in the competition between the US and China? You already partly answered that, but here comes the addition, especially with regards to the post-pandemic global economic recovery.
How did you say the end?
Oh, the question is again about the position of the EU and between China and the US, but with a particular focus on the economic recovery post-corona, post-pandemic.
I do not believe that recovery and need of recovery changes anything, because even so far everybody has been obliged to take care of the economy. If there's a downside like COVID, well, you just continue taking care. Your own activities must be, well, more active in that situation. But I do not see that it changes somehow the relation to China.
So you think that things will stay pretty much the same even post-pandemic?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So, since we're already in the business of taking questions from our viewers, Mr. President, here's another one by a colleague who is actually writing from Moscow. His name is Sergei Utkin. He is the head of the Strategic Assessment section at IMEMO. And he, in fact, has a question about the Finnish experience of military non-alignment. I think that's probably the correct way to put it, right? So here's the question. Would you agree, Mr. President, that Finland's international positioning cannot teach anyone anything because it's so unique and so uniquely linked to Finnish character and history, question mark, or are there still lessons that can be useful for others?
Maybe I shortly tell what we think about our defense and security policy. It's built on 4 pillars. First, being strong by yourself. Actually, Finland is, in proportion to the size of the country, very well equipped and very well armed. Just an example, according to my understanding, if Finland calls all its trained reserves to service, that would be more than Germany if Germany calls its trained reserves. Germany is at least 15 times bigger country. That, I think, explains a bit how we Finns have taken our defense for centuries. We have, well, the strongest artillery in Europe, for example. The idea is to build a threshold which is high enough that anybody trying to come in understands that it will be very expensive. And on the other hand, we are cooperating all the time. We are partners, enhanced partners with NATO. We are cooperating a lot with Sweden, even directly with the USA. We are members in CHEF combination, UK-led. We are in the German combination also. So our cooperability is high. That makes, if you're strong, like we feel that we are, and you're capable of cooperating, that makes you a lucrative partner if something happens. That's how we think about that. Then to Russia, yes, we have 1,000 kilometers common border. You have to take notice to that too. And well, old wisdom is that with your neighbor, you should have decent relations, firm, clear where the border is, but nevertheless a relation, dialogue, talk with each other. And surely, at least the 4th pillar is international cooperation by multilateral institutions. And I have to say that it's maybe weakening because we do not have enough dialogue. And even UN and Security Council doesn't seem to be very decisive or capable of doing these decisions. So this is what we are doing, and being very active on creating EU defense. Now we are on the way to have the compass. That's very interesting discussion inside EU.
And that you would say makes Finland's experience so unique that you would say very difficult to kind of translate into different contexts. So no lessons to be learned from that for others.
I think it's a good model. Why not?
Mr. President, before we turn it over to our guests here, both on site and online, I have a kind of a final question for you that I wanted to ask you. And in preparing our conversation, I have read that the first dog in Finland is really a big thing. And I think the name of the current first dog is Osku. It's a terrier. And this kind of got me thinking about politicians and pets. So here's my question for you. Which gift would you prefer? A nice puppy by President Vladimir Putin, or rather a panda baby by Xi Jinping?
Yeah, well, I like animals in general.
And I think you already have pandas in Helsinki Zoo, right?
Not in Helsinki, but in Finland, yes.
In Finland, okay. Great, so thank you so much, Mr. President,
thank you.
now. Now we'll turn it over to our guests here in the room. I already see a number of hands up. Wow, I think I will have to make a selection. We have time until past, and I'll give the privilege to the few people who have joined us and who are not from Berlin. So I see Lynn Kwok from Singapore. Lynn, if you wanted to ask the first question, and maybe I'll pull some questions. I did see Jana Puljarin, who was over there, and in the first row, Roderich Kiesewetter. So we'll take the three of you for a first round of questions. Lynn, you go first. And the mic is coming.
Thank you so much, Nora, and congratulations to the Körber-Stiftung for two very significant anniversaries. Thank you, Mr. President. My question relates to the two reports recently published by your government. So one on foreign and security policy and the other one on the China Action Plan. And in both these reports, your government took pains to stress that Finland shares the assessment of the EU of China as a cooperation partner and an economic competitor and a strategic rival. For someone who doesn't come from your part of the world and from your country, obviously, could you please help me understand the granularity of why Finland considers China to be a strategic rival and the extent to which dialogue has helped address some of these concerns of China as a strategic rival to Finland? That's my first question. And if I may...
Then can we
no, that's
leave
fine.
it at one?
Okay,
fantastic. Sure. Thank you. Mr. President, afterwards, I'll be happy to remind you of the questions, and Jana is next.
Thank you very much. My name is Jana Puljarin. I work for the European Council on Foreign Relations, and I listened to what you said about the pillars of Finnish security policy, the 4 pillars, but I was actually missing a comment on the United States, because you have strong bilateral relations with the United States. You're not a member of NATO, but you also have a good partnership with NATO. So how do you see the role of the United States currently in European security, and also with a view maybe after 2024?
Jana, thank you for that very straightforward question. And Roderich Kiesewetter.
Also not from Berlin, yes. No, thank you very much indeed. I'm Roderich Kiesewetter, member of the German Parliament, and we have received 2 very wise speeches. And the key question was how to revitalize the Helsinki acquis and the spirit of Helsinki. Our President Steinmeier has mentioned it, and you have also mentioned the model and the spirit itself. Several hundred kilometers apart is Minsk from Helsinki. And we have overburdened Minsk in the last 7 years. We have had a lot of hope, but Minsk failed so far. So we all are, I think, we are in the endeavor, if we revitalize Helsinki, not to overburden Helsinki. If we want to revitalize Helsinki, I think we need to take up some topics like trust in new technologies and to set international standards. The other issue is legal migration. I don't want to mention now nuclear disarmament, that's quite clear. I'm a former officer, quite clear. However, I believe that if we want to revitalize Helsinki, we need to include China. Who should start the process? Is this a process coming from a country with non-alignment like Helsinki, like Finland? Should it do the European Union? Or should it be an alliance of members of parliaments of different countries, like-minded liberal nations? Thank you.
Thank you very much, also for the conciseness. So we have 2 questions on China. China, why a strategic rival to Finland? Who should we bring China into the revival of Helsinki? And then what about the US? Jana's question. Mr. President.
Yes, thank you. First to China. I think I described Finnish position and relation to China already. And to your question, if there's a willingness to have dialogue, if there's a willingness to give an answer to what I call human responsibilities. So actually, all those who have a willingness must be together. And calling them, who is calling them, or are they calling themselves? Like it should take place. That's not the main question here. But I do agree with you that at the end, we can't just stay in Europe. But China is not the only outsider from Europe. We need all those who are prepared to give an answer, accept to give an answer to human responsibilities. The role of USA in NATO was that
in European security.
In Europe, okay. Well, that is something that has been discussed now in Europe quite many years, specifically during the President Trump's time. How I see, and I think it's very obvious that US is the core of NATO, and how active US is, that active NATO is here. But I do not believe that there are major changes taking place. And according to my understanding, President Biden has already, in a way, said it, that they consider transatlantic cooperation as important as it has been, and that means also keeping the NATO strong.
Mr. President, if I could, there's one question I wanted to convey to you which has reached us via Twitter. And this question is asked by Tong Zhao. Tong Zhao is a senior fellow at the Carnegie Tsinghua Center in Beijing. And here is the question. Against the backdrop of rising US-China tensions, is there a chance that European countries can again help facilitate a mutual concession process, just like Helsinki, with the aim of reaching a common set of principles guiding relations among the major powers? Again, that's a question that will ask you to dig a little deeper even into the issue of the Spirit of Helsinki. What's your thought on that?
Well, surely we in Finland, I'm sure European Union, everybody is, I believe, willing to help to reach the goal. That is a dialogue which is giving answers to those major problems we are facing. So at the end, the question is willingness of the participating sides, whether they are ready or not.
Yeah, it all depends
and
on...
I do not believe that somebody can, from outside, come and tell that, well, yes, you should now discuss, if there is no willingness. But what we can do is to point it out, and that's why I'm all the time talking about Helsinki spirit, because it needs open will to discuss, have dialogue, and even solve problems.
The willingness and an open mind. I think we have time for one final question at this session, bearing in mind that it's 3 minutes to 6:30. I have Ambassador Siddiq with us from Afghanistan here.
Mr. President, let me introduce myself. My name is Hamid Siddiq. I am the former Afghan ambassador here in Germany. All other friends spoke about China relation and about also this part of the region, but Afghanistan is also another point of crisis there. You mentioned it before, on the border of West Europe is a lot of refugee movement, and a part of this refugee came from Afghanistan.
Now I have difficulties in hearing you.
A part of the refugee, they're coming from Afghanistan, as you know. And the reason is well known for everyone, what has happened in the last 3-4 months in Afghanistan. And we see, and I'm witnessing myself, that the situation is not improving, perhaps go in a very, very wrong direction. If this continue like this, we are going to have much more and more refugee. So what is your assessment for a solution? What was going wrong in this part of the world?
In Afghanistan?
In Afghanistan. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm not necessarily willing to judge what has been done wrong, because it doesn't actually bring anything good. But what we should think is how to solve the situations as they now are. I know that there are some connections to Talibans, not official ones, but nevertheless, there are also some mediators who try to help, and so far we are on that. And surely being capable of sending messages to Taliban and sending also our wishes and demands. But I agree with you that it might be someday a huge challenge.
Well, we could probably discuss this for hours and hours, but Mr. President, I think we have already had a lot of time from your very busy schedule, so thank you very much for this, lieber Herr Bundespräsident, dear guests both here on site and online. At the end of this event, I think it is fair to say that this has been a good example of talking to each other rather than about one another. So thank you very, very much. Thank you for celebrating and marking the 60th anniversary of the Bergedorf Round Table and the 10th anniversary of the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum with us. I have to say, at the end of this event, I'm at least a little bit more encouraged when it comes to the future of international dialogue?
Me too.
That's good to hear, Mr. President. That's good to hear.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you.